I'm Sarah Brown, and this is The Mothers, real conversations with leaders, creators, and thinkers about who we are, what we want, and how we build meaningful lives alongside motherhood. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Mothers. My guest today is Rachel Hochhauser, co-founder of the cult favorite puzzle brand Piecework, and most notably, author of Lady Tremaine, The Other Yesteryear, an instant New York Times bestseller, Reese's Book Club pick, and breathtaking reimagining of Cinderella through the eyes of its iconic, quote, evil stepmother. Quotes are important. When Rachel was in graduate school, she wrote the novel she was certain would launch her career. Instead, she rewrote it again and again. She collected thoughtful, encouraging rejections, and eventually, after years of trying, she put the manuscript in a drawer and stopped writing altogether. Her creative energy went elsewhere. She built a career in brand strategy, co-founded an agency, then co-founded Piecework, the puzzle company she never expected to become a real business. She became a mother. And then, in 2023, her husband became critically ill. Rachel was suddenly caring for a toddler, trying to hold together two businesses, and spending her days at the hospital while her husband underwent an emergency craniotomy and a long recovery from a brain abscess. One day, sitting in a waiting room, she came across an image of Cinderella's evil stepmother. But in that season of relentless caretaking and sacrifice, Rachel saw something different. Not a woman operating out of cruelty or self-interest, but a mother fiercely advocating for her own children. That spark became Lady Tremaine. Rachel calls what happened next her own Cinderella story, and it is. But what I love about her story is how much happened between the wish and the happy ending. Rachel's path wasn't linear. There was no assurance that writing would eventually work out for her. There were years when she stepped away from it entirely. But creativity is fueled by life. You keep living, you keep paying attention, and sometimes the experience you never would have chosen allows you to see an old story in an entirely new way. Rachel and I talk about the difference between being a writer and becoming an author, the tension between creativity and commerce, and the persistence it takes to make something deeply personal and then offer it to the world. We also talk about motherhood, the ways it can overwrite our identity, but also sharpen our sense of how we want to use our lives. Before children, Rachel says time felt infinite, and she barely wrote. Motherhood made time precious. The constraints forced her to use it. And perhaps most powerfully, we talk about the stories we tell about mothers. Who gets to be good, who gets cast as the villain, and what becomes visible when the mother finally gets to tell the story herself. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and follow The Mothers wherever you listen. And now, please enjoy my conversation with Rachel Hochhauser. I love to start getting to know our guests. I like hearing your stories. So much of this, and you will appreciate this as a writer, is just making sure everyone has a chance to share their story as they like to tell it. And I know we often are telling our own stories to ourselves on a regular basis and redefining who we are. But on this day, Rachel, I would love to hear kind of where things began for you back in Santa Barbara. I gather you're a lucky California girl. Were you creative from the get-go and sort of, or not at all? I'm curious how you would start.
I love the way that you phrase that question, because I do think that the way we self-define does change from minute to minute, day to day. And so today, I will answer that question. I had a very idyllic childhood. You never recognize it, until it's in the rearview mirror. But I grew up in Santa Barbara. I had a very creative family. So I never defined myself as particularly creative, but I think my life was filled with creative pursuits organically. I had a lot of non-traditional schooling. I went to Montessori school as a kid. I went to public Santa Barbara High School, but they have an art program within the high school that I was a part of. So I got to explore a lot in hindsight, and I think it was very formative.
Yeah. You said, were your parents in creative industries, or how was creativity brought to life for you?
My dad is an architect. He has his
Mm.
own firm. He's still working. I don't know if he'll ever stop working.
Mhm.
And my mother was a graphic designer. So, and then my grandmother was an artist. And so
Oh,
I never
wow.
saw it that way. Like it wasn't defined for me and those terms. But I think when you're around people who see the world visually, you just naturally pick up on that.
Yeah, yeah. And both my parents are writers, and I think in a way that, as we said initially, when you grow up around it, you don't really know to notice it in a certain way. But it did make writing seem like a profession. And
Yeah.
I think when you grow up around things that are sort of creative industries and pursuits, you sort of there's an assumption made that, oh, this could possibly be a way of a sort of a career.
Yes.
Did you start thinking, when did you start thinking about sort of professional moves and maybe moving into this sort of creative lane?
I think a lot of kids go through phases of saying what they want to be
Yeah.
when they're older. And I went through, I would say author, because I thought it sounded really fancy. But I was writing books. I put advertisements in them, which is sort of funny in hindsight.
Oh,
Like I would
wow.
like, they're sort of like magazines, I would like pause and create like a shampoo commercial or something
I
that I
love
sketched.
this. You have great hair,
Um,
so it probably makes sense.
Not correlated, but, and I think I had a fashion designer phase when I got a little bit older and would draw clothing. I had an ambassador phase, which I didn't understand what that meant, but it
Mm.
sounded very grown up
Yeah.
and cool to me at the time. But I circled back to writing by late high school, by the time I was really actually thinking about it in more serious terms. I was saying and thinking I wanted to be a writer without doing a lot of writing,
Yeah.
actually. But it was something that I was attracted to and ended up studying and as an undergrad at NYU.
Yeah.
They didn't have a creative writing major at the time, so I minored in it and ended up majoring in history, which was just essentially a random choice.
Mm-hmm.
But then I went to grad school for writing, so it was in my intent. It just didn't end up being my career for many years.
Yeah. Which is not uncommon. It's an impossible thing to do.
Yes, it's kind of amazing the career path of any form of writer, journalist, fiction, nonfiction, it's a winding path no matter which way you go about it. It's no two are the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And then how did you, so you were at NYU.
I was back in California and I had applied to all East Coast schools. I thought New York was the center of the universe. I loved it there,
Yeah.
but I got a full scholarship at USC. It was the only West Coast school I applied to, and you don't want to go into debt and
No.
for a writing degree. Writing's not really known for making you the big bucks. So it was an offer too good to refuse, and it was essentially a teaching scholarship. So in addition to taking courses, I was teaching undergrads
That's
at
great.
the same time.
Yeah. And then eventually your work kind of moved into branding, creative direction, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, so it actually predated grad school. What happened was when I was at NYU, I had an internship at an advertising agency. That was just sort of a passive selection via some connections of mine. It was a paid internship, which was really uncommon at the time. So a very big deal to me at, just trying to make ends meet in the city. And I had that my last year at NYU and then graduated in the beginning of the recession. So the job market tanked. And if I wanted to stay in the city, which I did, I needed a job. So I, did everything I could at the agency to get them to hire me, and then was what they call a junior planner, which is a brand strategist.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was never something I was really proactive about choosing as a career path for myself. I kind of fell into it in a way. And I did that for a couple years before going to grad school. And then when I was going to school, the same agency happened to open a new branch in LA at the same time that I moved out. So I continued working part-time. And when I finished grad school, I again needed to go back to making an income, and, wasn't like I, had some full-time job lined up writing fiction. Those don't really exist.
Yeah.
And so then I went back to working. I think I negotiated 4 days a week. This was pre-COVID. So it was, unheard of to try and be at home one day of the week and not working. And but the idea was that I was going to use that day to work on my fiction.
Wow.
So it was like a patchwork of, going back and forth and code switching and wearing different hats in different hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Were there times where you were like, I just don't know if this writing thing, I'm sure, maybe every day.
Oh yeah. So when I was in grad school, I wrote a novel
Mhm.
that I thought was going to be my magnum opus.
Mhm.
I thought, I'm going to be a wonder kid. I'm going to make it. This is going to launch me. And I could not, not only could I not get it sold, I couldn't even get representation for it.
Mm.
And I was getting really great feedback and really nice, lengthy rejections and so I was rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it and pouring my free time into it. And it still wasn't really gaining traction. And so, it's a slow process, each rewrite and then going back out to the market. So by the time I had rewritten it, I don't know what round we were on. I was in my later 20s and I was just like, this isn't happening for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was hugely emotional. I had to put it in a drawer, felt like burying it essentially. I had written the thing into the grave and I quit writing. I was just like, I can't, it felt too painful to have poured so much of myself into something and then have nobody want it.
Yes.
So I stopped writing for a while. And ironically, that was around when I started Piecework, which is the company that I run now. But in hindsight, I'm able to see that my surplus creative energy was going to writing. And then I put my surplus creative energy elsewhere for a little while. It's a lot easier to make sense of these things when you're, looking 10 years in the rearview mirror.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I was very impressed by Piecework, which you co-founded. And then did you also co-found Major Studio, the sort of agency before? So, incredible.
So at some point in that process, I left that initial agency and went to a new one, which was kind of it doesn't exist anymore. It's since been acquired. But I call it the Wild West of creative agencies because it was essentially a startup. It was a bunch of very smart young kids operating an agency, and it was sink or swim. And I figured out how to do it and how to fake it until you make it. So that was a huge leap in my own skill set because I went from being, mid-level to having to figure everything out and managing people. And so after doing that for a couple of years, I started Major Studio with some other great partners. And that simplifies a process that was laborious and not that clear cut. It really started with me getting a lot of freelance work and then essentially deciding to hang a shingle with partners who are doing the same to put everything under an official roof as opposed to kind of cobbling it all together always. So Major was great. I mean, we worked on big campaigns with really big brands, but it was client services and especially into the pandemic, it was exhausting. Client services is like just you burn out, And so meanwhile, while I was doing Major, that's when I started Piecework also.
Oh my gosh. You have a lot of energy.
I wouldn't define myself that way, but when I talk about it like this, it certainly sounds like it.
Yeah. Well, maybe, people that are creative, and I think everyone on some level is creative, but people that lean into that even more, there's something, tell me if you agree, it's sort of, it's sustaining in its own way. If you're doing it in the right space, where you get energy as much as you're investing into it. So I can kind of understand how one might be able to generate so much all at once. Also that time of life, this was pre-kids, I'm guessing.
Yes. Yeah, it was all pre-kids. You never know how much free time you had until you have children and look backwards.
Yes, totally. And then, so when did you put writing aside for a little while, you started Piecework Puzzles, which is gorgeous is just the word I keep coming up with for everything that you've touched, but it's just so thoughtful, and considered, and all of these in a world of like mass production, it's sort of just a very elegant approach to something and a reimagining, which is another thing that I think is a theme of what you produce, at least. Tell me about where Piecework came from.
Piecework came about, I won't say by accident, but I didn't intend for it to be, when I co-founded it with my co-founder Jenna, what it has become. I was just doing puzzles all the time in my free time. I discovered them really organically late in life. I wasn't like a puzzle fan. I didn't come from a puzzle family where we worked on them a lot. And they were a great means to unwind. And so I was sort of in like a puzzle hobby phase of just doing them on my coffee table while watching TV or bringing them on vacation. And pretty naively, I was like, well, I work at an agency, like we can make some puzzles, we can do this ourselves. And it's true. We knew how to build a brand and how to build a website and how to, do social media and all of that. But there's so much to launching a products-based business that I had absolutely no experience with. So it was almost meant to be like a creative portfolio piece that maybe hopefully paid for itself. But then we got great press and it was very rewarding, but it was not profitable. And then the pandemic happened and everyone was stuck at home and wanting to work on puzzles. And that was, if I thought that earlier agency was sink or swim, like this was such a trial to figure out everything, while figuring out how to put out fires while you're, in the middle of the fire being burned alive.
Yeah.
Sort of what it felt like. So it was a real education. And I think we survived that and came out the other side, and we're still here to tell the tale, which is great. So I'm so proud of myself now that we did it. But at the time, I was like, what is happening? It was a lot. The pandemic years, for all of the reasons that everyone shared, that was a universal experience. It was a lot, but then also the professional side of it for me was harrowing.
Yeah. I think people don't talk enough about how to pursue a creative path requires so much resilience. It's brutal. Like no one's out there saying, yeah, let's make it easy for you to make this. And yeah, let's welcome it with open arms the second you dash off, the last line of your novel. We're all going to love it. I imagine maybe looking back, a lot of these, the trials that are not, everyone's life has these trials, but I think having something that's personal be scrutinized in this way along your professional journey thus far is probably really valuable to being able to come forward and continue on. We'll talk about Lady Tremaine, but do you think about resilience in creativity?
I think there's such inherent tension between being a writer and being an author, or being a creative and being an entrepreneur or business person. They're not the same skill set, and they don't even really go hand in hand outside of a person needing to be able to do both in order to make a living from the creative side. So I think it's an inherent challenge to being a creative. You have to figure out how to do something that maybe I think it comes really naturally to some creatives, but if you have to grow this whole other skill set essentially, that is not synonymous with the initial one.
Yeah. Speaking of growing skill sets, you eventually had children, 2 daughters, maybe.
Yes.
When did they enter the scene?
My older daughter is almost 5, so I had her in 2021, summer of 2021.
Got it.
So I had founded Piecework. I was still working on Major. I had not gotten back to writing at the time. And that was its own education, continues to be daily.
Yeah, absolutely. Was it weird sometimes in this creative author space? I feel like there are a lot of, you described as a lot of different hats. Was it when you became a mother where you're like, oh, this all makes sense? Or were you like, who is this person that I'm supposed to be?
A little bit of both. Like I think my personal experience of stepping into role as mom is so organic, just in terms of like the feelings I have for my children and the maternal instinct and protectiveness and championship and all the things that go in hand with it. But I'm also constantly at war with, or the two parts of me, the part of me that is the other Rachel, the no kids Rachel, is at war with mother Rachel. And it's not that they're against each other. So maybe war isn't the best analogy, but they're fighting for resources.
Yes.
Essentially in the organization of Rachel, the two versions are each looking to get their own. I don't know that it's a bad thing. Like I'm kind of at peace with it in a way that I don't know that I go into the mom guilt to the same extent that some people do, for better or worse. Because I think that the non-parent Rachel, the non-mother, like it still serves the mother Rachel. Like they all ladder up to a higher Rachel. I'm saying
Yeah.
my own name too many times. I think is like at one with, looking out for my kids
Yeah.
and doing what's best for them.
Yeah. I read that Lady Tremaine came out of a particularly trying year. Um, I've heard a lot of stories, whether it's a book or otherwise, of someone's one of their greatest triumphs comes from like one of their hardest times. But can you share kind of this story around your husband's health scare and all this stuff that kind of was the initial maybe spark where you started to think about, was this your first return to writing also after all
It
this?
was,
Yeah.
yeah. So in 2023, my daughter was 18 months. My second daughter wasn't born yet. And my husband got really ill out of the blue. We didn't know what was wrong at first. He essentially couldn't move. He was nonstop vomiting for 3 weeks. He lost 35 pounds in 3 weeks. And eventually we found out he had a brain abscess and then he was rushed into an emergency craniotomy, and it was a grueling, many months long recovery. And overnight, I effectively became his caretaker and a single parent of our toddler. And she was not at an age that's known for being easy. And I was still trying to work my 2 jobs at the agency and doing puzzles, although, my partners were so gracious about giving me the leniency that I needed.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just a really challenging time. And just spending a lot of time at the hospitals. One of these hours in the waiting room, I was scrolling on my phone and I came across a depiction of Cinderella's evil stepmother. And there was just something about being in that season of sacrifice myself and in that context where it enabled me to see her differently and not as a villain looking to harm anyone or, even operating with self-interest, but really just advocating for her own children. And that's what I was doing. I was constantly just putting the people in my family before me. And I thought there's a story there. And I marinated on it. And my husband, who's doing so much better, I always forget I should lead with that because it would allow everyone to enjoy the story a bit more. But he's doing so much better. And as soon as he was, life was beginning to feel like it was back on rails, I really started thinking about this and working on it in earnest. And it was a return to my writing desk, my metaphorical writing desk. So it felt emotional and important. And I think, what had happened had helped put a lot of things into perspective. And I was surprised to find that even in this context, I had that itch to write, that had returned despite the circumstances. So I went on a leave of absence ultimately with my husband's encouragement. I mean, this whole thing wouldn't have happened without him and his encouragement from the agency, from Major Studio. And I treated it like a job. During my hours of childcare, I sat down and I worked on Lady Tremaine, which, is the story of, I like to call it an untelling of Cinderella because it's trying to dismantle the architecture of the traditional fairy tale, but it's, through the perspective of the so-called evil stepmother. And that it was rewarding at the time, it wasn't work. It felt like I was doing something for myself and for me.
Yeah.
So the whole process, especially the outcome of having the book finally be published and having it be well received has been, it's cliche, but I like to say my Cinderella story.
Yeah, it's tremendous. I feel like my immediate comparison was to Wicked, which I honestly struggle to watch. I don't really like it very much. But in terms of this, like the retelling, something that you was told to you often in childhood in a certain way, and then suddenly you can reimagine who these people are or see them in a different light. It's just such a compelling. At bare minimum, it's fun, but it's such a compelling, deep read and an escape. And especially, a time of reclaiming what it is to be a mother and reclaiming our own stories. It's moving. And I was wondering did you know, and I imagine there's a sense of, it's almost scary when you feel this a little bit, but when you had with encouragement, you were going to sit down and pursue this, were you nervous? Were you like, this is the idea, but I don't want to like crush the idea? A little bit of sort of Mice and Men, Steinbeck, who's like the little puppy, but you don't want to kill the puppy. Did you struggle with that? Yeah.
I really did. It's so easy to gloss over it later, but I was really nervous because I had to pause a majority of my income for
Mhm.
those months, and that felt really risky and scary. I didn't know that anything was going to come of this. But I think it felt like I needed to do it. I needed to try it again. I had gotten over the previous, creative breakup with writing,
Hmm.
and it felt like time. But it was scary, and that fear is really what caused me to write it so quickly. Twiddle my thumbs or dilly dally or really use my free time because time is so precious with
Yeah.
young kids to get words on the page. But I didn't know what was going to happen. So in hindsight, it's a great decision. I, put myself first and invested in myself and took a risk, et cetera, et cetera. But at the time, it just felt like, okay, it felt like I owed it to myself. Like, let's just try this to see what happens.
Mm-hmm. I love that. One of many wonderful themes from the book is, I would say, like dependence versus independence versus freedom. And in this, I think, unspecified era of the book, it was very much in vogue or the way that a woman would have any sort of agency or power, and maybe not agency, but some sort of security was through marriage. And I often think it's something I'm thinking about now as I'm pursuing something off of I'm in a similar, maybe Lady Tremaine state or the writing piece, left a long, secure job at Google, now pursuing something creative that isn't paying me the way Google did yet. But I'm pursuing something that feels meaningful and is maybe a source of freedom. But I'm wondering what you came to think of about the sort of the tension between dependence and independence in the context of a family and a marriage where you're trying to pursue work that's meaningful and important. And it's something I struggle with. And we're supposed to all be, very independent women, and need nothing and rely on nobody. And yet also, as you're saying, a lot of, for you to do this did require wonderfully relying on a partner. Um, what was after you wrote that, what did you take away about like dependence and independence?
Well, I think dependence and like there's so many versions of it, right? Like our minds immediately go to financial dependence. Many modern women do not want to be financially dependent on their husbands.
Yeah.
It's something that at least my mother, was a tiny bug in my ear
Yeah.
about having a trade or a profession. And but I think women give so much in other departments. Like there's interdependence, that there's so much unvalued labor and work that goes into running a family or a household. And we're talking about, heteronormative families here. There's a lot of families that don't fit this mold. There's a lot of heteronormative families that also don't fit this mold. So I'm really speaking in broad strokes, but I like to look at things in a complete picture. And I think that like all different forms of input into a family should be valued, not just financial.
Yes, absolutely. There's also a theme related to this of finding freedom and kind of, I don't think this gives anything away, but the characters in the book kind of grappling with, this idea of marriage as a way to find security, but also the absence of it offering maybe some degree of freedom. Is that how you think about it? What is?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think so the book is written like historical fiction, but it's not actually historical fiction, and that it's not based on a particular decade in history in a particular country or society. But I think marriage it was framed in a lot of fairy tales as the happy ever after because it was security for women for so long. That's not really the case anymore. So that was one reason why I felt like it was time to reframe how we're thinking and talking about happily ever after. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but I think you can look at it from both sides. I think there is freedom within marriage and there's freedom being unmarried. You can flip the lens no matter what.
Yes, yes. And again, like back to the beginning, kind of owning their story and their own experience and taking control. I think when we're sometimes we forget that we can.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I also, in this sort of intermix, like all the many hats that we have, identity is one that we talk about a lot, and identity as a mother. There's some really nice phrases in your book from the beginning versus the end about kind of what a mother is relative to her children. And there's an early phrase where you say, a mother in the bones of her bones was not in balance. She gave without ending. She thought not as an I, but as a we. And more often it was you, you, you. And then fast forward, you kind of scrutinize this later. You, my darling yous were just another way of saying me, I. What are you trying to say there? Or what does that mean to you, hearing me awkwardly read back your own words to you, of what it mean, like what it is to be a mother who is so, identity is sort of intertwined in a sometimes wonderful, but also hard way with their children. And I'm curious how your own experience as a mother was like brought into how you wrote this story.
They are completely intertwined. I think I'm so early in my experience of being a mother. It would be hard to strip it away from my perspective, especially writing a story like this. So it was a lot easier to imbue my characters with thoughts and feelings that I've had myself. But yeah, I mean, I think that those two phrases that you read, they're a couple of my favorites from the book, and they reflect two things that don't mean the same thing, but I think both can be true. The first being that I do think for me, parenting it's unending, relentless giving, often without, acknowledgement or appreciation. And there's something beautiful in that and so meaningful. And there's also something so thankless in that. And that's, being unbalanced. It's almost like when you become a mother, you are balanced by your children because you become unbalanced, leaning towards them so they prop you up. But then the latter is how much, just my own thought of how much of this is self-centered or self-serving. At what point do you have to kind of let go of your children and push them out into the world and find your own personal balance once more? Because I think when you become a mother, to your earlier question, you define yourself as one. And sometimes that definition can almost overwrite the original you in a way that can be unhealthy. These are just personal grapplings, not at all a reflection, an observation of, worldwide parenting or anything like that. But I've, in all the ways that we champion our kids and want them to succeed, how much of that is a reflection on us. And, when parents kind of overparent, when all the things you want your kid to do, like, I think it's just an interesting question to ask of what is actually for them and what is for you.
Yeah. Well, we'll call Dr. Becky after this, but I feel like when they're so young, you are so intertwined, you need to be. And it's actually, as I was reading it, it feels it's empowering to the mother to think of it that way, that I'm not, this isn't a sacrifice of self for me to wake up every 90 minutes overnight. This is me sort of investing in me in some ways. And then it's over time, this, as the child becomes more of an individual, you can see how it's an intentional effort to kind of maybe think about it a little bit differently. But it's hard.
I think, it is hard. And there's almost something biological. There is something biological about it. And that if you've had your children biologically, I imagine this feels the same. I have not adopted, my children. I was pregnant with them and birthed them. So this is speaking to that experience specifically, but like they were grown of my body. So they are of me in a way. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at. But I imagine that that's an experience that people have. Your children just become an extension of you.
Yeah. Well, a useful entry point to my next question, which was the relationship between Lady Tremaine, aka the evil stepmother, and Cinderella, aka Ellen, in this context. So mother stepdaughter dynamic. I feel like that was written incredibly well. I've never had a stepdaughter, so I can't say for sure, but it seemed I don't know, very like psychologically informed about what sort of a mother would be kind of wrestling with when inheriting, especially in this context, the way that she, inherited her stepdaughter. I was curious, maybe even just the process of how you came to think about how to write that relationship.
So I appreciate you saying that. I wanted the relationship to feel really realistic. I don't think that it is reflective of all step parenting experiences. I would hope it's not.
Yeah.
So Ellen, I started with Ellen's character and thinking about that relationship, and she's the Cinderella character. And I thought about all of the things that define the traditional cultural Cinderella in our minds, which is that she's very beautiful, she's very nice, and she's passive. And what happens when you push that to the extreme, passivity? I mean, she's so passive. She doesn't even get herself to the ball. The godmother gets her there. But passivity becomes passive aggression, and niceness becomes, someone who's so nice that it's inauthentic. And I wanted her to become this symbol of femininity almost taken too far. So I think it was easy for me to imagine what it would be like to have a teen daughter, and all the ways that teen daughters can already be annoying, who's also sort of this paragon of virtue, but in a way that's all about virtue signaling versus the virtue itself. But I also had a lot of empathy for her because I think she's a child of trauma in a way, losing both of her parents. And so just that was my viewpoint for the whole book, is how do we, if you really made all of these tenets of these fairy tales real in real life, what would these characters be like and how would they react to one another?
Yeah. One of my favorite characters actually was not a human, but this falcon.
Lucy.
Lucy. Tell me about Lucy. I gathered from another article that you have a little tiny painting of maybe who Lucy is. Lucy, I imagine, is very important to you, but tell me about Lucy. What does Lucy represent?
So Lucy started a little bit more just like as a narrative functional device. I knew that in traditional villain stories, the villain often has an animal sidekick, like Dr. Evil. That's his cat, his hairless cat.
Yes.
But I didn't think that my character, and I knew her so well, she would never have a furry lap pet. She would for sure only have something that had function. So the falcon came to mind. I had very minimal experience with falcons, but another pandemic story, had taken a falconry workshop for one day as something to do that was outside. And so I knew enough of them that I felt like I could write about them. And the story just unfolded organically from this bird. And the bird, there's no better literary device than a falcon. Like, you can really use them for a lot. So she ended up being a real important part of the Lady Tremaine story.
Yes. A hero in many ways. Yeah, I love that. The other theme that we talk about in general, but it also is very relevant to the story too, is the idea of support and help, and how, and obviously in the context of this podcast, like to be a mother who's also working outside the home, or in some cases like in the home, well, the modern day version of in and outside of the home, that it requires, a village. And I have noticed that I think in almost every author that I've interviewed, I look at their acknowledgments and they thank their childcare. And I love what you wrote. You said, this book would not have been possible without childcare, a privilege that should be a right. Brandy, I'm going to butcher their names. I hopefully not too bad. Brandy Dare and Naomi Dyer and Naomi Stringer took care of my babies and gave me the peace of mind I needed to focus. You are both such an important part of the story. And first, just thank you for writing that and including that. And I'm sure that means a ton to them. And which is why I wanted to read it out loud, because I think that behind the scenes, there's so many people that allow us to pursue and deliver in these amazing ways. I find it fascinating that I think the father will thank the wife, but rarely thanks the childcare. And yeah, I think maybe can you talk a little bit about the experience that you had juggling? It sounds like you were very diligent at creating the mind space, but I find there's something really essential for at least my creative process is I need to not have to think about my children on some level. And that's only possible if I really trust that they're in a space and they're cared for. So tell me about how childcare played into your ability to do all of this.
I think you said all the important parts already. I mean, I feel the same way. You have to you have to not be concerned for them. You have to go into a separate compartment of your mind. Mm-hmm. And that's impossible to do even when, they're watching TV in the next room. Mm-hmm. It's like I really need to know that someone else is on and looking out for them and taking care of them. Like I have to switch roles entirely. And I don't think a mom can switch roles unless someone else is stepping in her place. And to speak more tactically, I had a full-time nanny for my girls, when they were too young to be in preschool, essentially. I know daycare can start very early, but when we had our first daughter, it was the pandemic and I, just wasn't ready to make that decision. And so I had the best of both worlds, and then I could see my kids when I, opted in and wanted to go downstairs and was able to spend time with them. But I was also able to excuse myself and go work as needed.
Yeah. Did that inform in some ways their various like supporting characters, like literally their role is to support the in your book that kind of, I want to say something better than the help, but everyone that sort of works in these houses in different ways and supports, the royal characters, etc. Were they sort of inspired in any way by your own, or written differently maybe by your own experience, really relying on that kind of support?
I would say that characters were not at all based off of the caretakers that have been in my life, but the role of the caretakers definitely would have informed it, because I think when you do have someone watching and taking care of your children, I view it as a partnership. Like it's not employee and staff. It's you are working with shared goals. You have to be in open communication. And a nanny is like an extension of your family in a way that can be confusing and challenging to navigate too for both parties. Mm-hmm. It's such a specific and strange role because you have to figure out how to balance, the professional components with someone working on the most intimate and important part of your life that sees you. Yeah. For me, it's like they're seeing you breastfeed, they're seeing you, it's like those things don't typically go together. Mm-hmm. So I think, you see that with some of the characters in Lady Tremaine, and the way that when someone is so enmeshed in your life and your home, they are an extension of your family. Mm-hmm. And that can be beautiful, that can be complicated, but so that is what informed the writing process there.
Yeah. Is there anything that or a message that you were hoping for your story to convey about motherhood and the reality of being a mother, that you wanted people to take away? The ending is certainly so wonderful, and strong and powerful, and just kind of like the best kind of, I don't know, punch to the chest, like takes your breath away, kind of like it all kind of lands and you're like, fuck yeah, like this is what it's all about. But is there a message that you were hoping people would take away about what it is to be a mother?
I think there are so many micro messages throughout the book, but maybe a bigger one that is not stated but demonstrated is that so much of your parenting can be about what you exhibit as a parent and like the life you're living and the choices you're making for yourself, versus I think oftentimes parenting is thought of as like prescriptive parenting, like the rules we're setting, the types of discipline we're using, the food we're feeding, the values we're instituting with our words, be kind, that sort of thing. But really what it is the example you're setting through your own actions and choices.
Yeah. And now what has it been like to have your third child, I guess, out in the world, after investing so much into it and seeing how it's being received?
It is thrilling. It's a dream come true for me. I feel greedy, honestly. I feel
Yeah.
so appreciative. I know it sounds like a party line, but like I'm filled with gratitude. I feel like for probably the first time in my adult life, I've been able to be present and experience something good happening to me as it's happening. But also I feel greedy for more. I want to write more and more and more books, into infinity and beyond. So I'm thrilled with it.
Oh, that's good. The creative well is deep. So are you writing a new book already? Or what is the process?
I am. Yeah, I have a finished draft of it.
Oh my
Actually,
gosh.
I had a deadline. So everyone's like, that's incredible.
Hmm.
Thank my editor. My deadline was Lady Tremaine's publication date. So I had to
Wow.
finish it before it even came into the world. So we're in edits now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when can we see Lady Tremaine on screen? I feel like this is perfect for what's Reese's
Hello,
Hello
sunshine.
Sunshine. Yes.
I
Not you don't have to
hope
give
we'll
anything
see
away.
it.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I hope we'll see it soon. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
That's so awesome. Is that actually, as an author in today's day and age, like, is that what is success? When are you like, yes, we that really made it, or what were you hoping to achieve?
Oh gosh, that is such a big question
Yeah.
for authors specifically because I think that the finish line constantly changes and moves forward.
Mhm.
I will be happy forever with what I've already done. Like I think this is success to me,
Mhm.
but also it has shown me new things that I want to do and accomplish. So it's a little bit of just reminding yourself to again like be present and look at what you have. And I always like to say it's not an even playing field and it's not a meritocracy. Like this is a business
Mhm.
industry like any others. And I think writers who are able to separate their art from that, I admire them. I really admire writers who can really just separate their creativity from, the business side of the industry. I think that's a valuable skill set and something I'm always reminding myself of.
Yeah. And were there, because in retrospect, you had a lot of experience in the commercial side of creativity. I feel like advertising, branding, marketing, like this is commercial creativity. I don't know if there's probably a better term. And so I feel like you came with such a strong skill set to be able to think of both sides of this. Like maybe there's a story to be written, of course, and we can scrutinize every word selection, but we also, I think, and maybe some writers actually don't care about this, but I'm curious where you sit. There's also an interest in making it, I think some are more commercially oriented maybe than others. Like I also want a lot of people to read this and I want it to be compelling. Maybe I want it to be movie viable. Did your background kind of help you put those two sides together?
Yes, to a certain extent. I think my first book didn't sell because it wasn't commercial enough. It really
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a plot. It had a
Mm.
lot of characters. um, so I was really intentional writing Lady Tremaine and thinking through something that was high concept, which is means it, is pitchable in a
Yeah.
sentence. And then I wanted to do my thing as a writer, inside of the high concept. And that was
Mhm.
a combination that really worked well and served me. So and it was all my years working in business that got me to the point where I could understand that. But I'm talking constantly about the difference between a writer and an author. And I felt like an intern in a new industry. I've been writing for a long time. I have not been an author for a long time. So I'm learning so much about how publishing works, how the sausage is made. I find it fascinating. I love it. I like thinking about, it as a system and as a business person, there are ways to game the system. What sits less comfortably for me is the personal branding aspect of it. Like I think I'm a classic older millennial who's, being like, what am I supposed to do? And
Totally.
not necessarily able to do that quite as seamlessly. And that's what's been new for me also. You'd think with all my years of working in social media for companies, but it's not the same when it's you and your own face and your
No.
own thing that you're trying to share with people.
I know it feels you have to kind of exploit yourself and it feels very uncomfortable. Yeah. Hold the line. You're doing a great job. Um, let's see. I think we have a few of our standard closing questions. And if you wouldn't mind indulging on these kind of rapid fire, I find they're always interesting. So, first is if you go back and tell your new mom self one thing, what would it be?
All of the cliches. Um, I think I would like take her face in my hands and say, "You're gonna have free time again."
Yeah. Yes. Do you feel like I meant to ask this earlier, but would you have ever written Lady Tremaine in some ways or been able to move into this next phase without having kids? Like, is there a way that having kids shifted your approach to writing and moved you from a writer to an author?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think it's because it made time and free time so much more precious. So when I was sitting down to write, I was actually writing and I felt a real pressure to use it. I said I wanted to write for so many years pre-kids and like barely wrote, barely got my word count there because time was infinite. You know, there was no pressure to move things forward. And I mean that both on the daily basis, like there's so much free time in a day, but also just looking ahead to the future. The future felt infinite.
Yeah.
So my children, not them specifically, but just their presence in my life has, I think, shown me what to do with my life in a way, that my life has space to do things.
Yes, I love that. And it also makes this tension between space and constraints. I think about this a lot where it's just as you said, when you had all the time in the world, like I didn't write as much. And there's something really useful about limitations.
I think constraint leads to a lot of creativity.
Yeah.
For me, I'm excited by constraint because it's a challenge to solve.
That's interesting. Yes. All right. Speaking of challenges, another question is if you go back and imagine along this journey of motherhood so far, is there anything or a theme of things that would have made this a little bit easier?
A magic refrigerator. You open it and dinner's ready. There's no dishes to do. It's just food, healthy food to eat for yourself and your family. Yes. Do those exist?
Yes, we should make that. That's a good next step. I'll write that one down. I agree.
Yeah. Winning business idea. You can have it.
Yes. The dinner has still not been solved. Like there's so many companies that are out there trying to solve different versions of like how to make dinner time easy. All of them seem like they don't, unless it's totally solved, it doesn't solve it.
I have really asked myself countless times. I have run 2 businesses. I have a whole career. I have spreadsheets. I'm organized. All of the things. Why can't I figure out dinner? Why can't I create a system, a repeatable system, so it's not an ongoing question in my family, but I have not solved it.
Totally. Do you also, yes or no, do you make dedicated dinners for a child that doesn't like what everyone else is eating, or you're like, we're all eating the same thing?
It's somewhere in between.
Yeah. Same. I really want to be the family that's like, this is dinner. I'm not going to make mac and cheese on the side.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's easier to keep the peace. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a different way, we've become a family with children with expectation for dessert every night, which is never something I foresaw.
Yeah.
And now seem to be unable to undo, but it is a great motivator, an eating motivator for them.
That's true. I know. Always be negotiating. All right, last question. These glorious kids might one day listen to this. Is there anything you'd like to say to them?
So much. It could fill the whole hour, but I think just that everything I do, every part of me, time away from you, time working, time writing, going on a trip, all of it in its own way is in service of you. Every part of me is in service of you.
Oh, yes. Can I ask really quickly, this idea of time writing is for them. I've talked to many wonderful other, like you, incredible authors, and they talk about how writing feels selfish in some ways, that they feel like there's a way, they still do it and they win Pulitzer Prizes and they're doing it. But there's a way, maybe unlike going to a corporate job, I don't know, where it feels selfish. Do you struggle with like it's harder to step away and say, I'm going to do this? Do you struggle with that at all? Or are you?
I don't. I mean, that's not to say that I'm not without my guilt, but to me, it goes back to demonstrating by example. I want, when I think about the future for my girls, I want them to do something that they love and find fulfilling and that they can prioritize. So there's that. Mm-hmm. And also I think it's kind of a cliche to say it this way, but it allows me to fill my cup. Yeah. I am a better, more present parent when I am in the right headspace, when my nervous system is calm, when I feel like I've gotten what I need. Mm-hmm. So, if I was just living my life in service of them in a more literal way, I don't think I would be a happy mother, which would not be great for them.
Yes. I very much agree. I feel very much the same. And I'm really glad you don't feel you shouldn't feel selfish going to write. I just find it's interesting. That specific industry seems to I hear the word selfishness come out when they're performing their work. And so I'm glad you, yet again, leading by example.
Right.
Yes. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. And congratulations on all that is Lady Tremaine, even before all the accolades. It's a beautiful book worth being incredibly proud of. And congrats on the persistence to get to this point. I feel like you should put your feet up all the time and sit by a fire. And I hope you have a falcon also that you can, go outside and go hunting with.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This has been really fun. Thank you. Rachel, thank you so much for stopping by the pod. It was so exciting to get to know your story. I think one of my favorite takeaways from everything we just learned is just the importance of persistence and endurance in general. I think it's a skill set also that mothers learn, but I think in industries, if you're going to pursue something creative, this is probably true in any industry, but it feels particularly pronounced if you're pursuing something creative. Persistence, endurance, literally the ability to endure, not just cardio, but enduring all of the setbacks, the times where the big dream doesn't quite happen, because to create is to have aspirations and dreams, and they will not come true. They certainly won't come true right off the bat. It's a non-linear journey, and it's so exciting to see Rachel's long journey pay off at this moment. I think she, as she said herself, it wasn't linear. There was no assurance that this was going to be the end state. I think she's describes it as her own Cinderella story, and it deservedly so. And I think what's so awesome is despite all of this, she was willing to go through seasons of stepping away from writing. She put that first draft of that first novel in a drawer eventually. And so in some ways, there are times to step away. But creativity is fueled by life. So you keep living, you keep paying attention, and you might notice things and sparks. And as you live, new ideas, better ideas, new ways of writing. I love what she talked about, how there's a difference between a writer and an author. And I think what she was suggesting behind that is writing as an activity versus authoring and authorship of creating a product, essentially, that is intended for an audience. Are kind of different things. One relies on elements of the other, but they have different end states potentially. So yes, keep creating, keep living. Most importantly, keep paying attention, and pick up Lady Tremaine, New York Times bestseller. Reese Witherspoon's pick. If Reese loves it, I do. And if you liked Wicked, you'll definitely like this. If you felt mixed about Wicked, I have complicated feelings about Wicked. I absolutely loved this. No complicated feelings. It's the story I want my daughters to grow up with. So thank you again, Rachel. Everyone else, we'll see you back here next week. In the meantime, keep on fighting the good fight. Thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode and we can reach even more rock stars like you. The Mothers is a production of Backline Media, shining a light on those who carry the team.